Welcome to Guilty Pleasure Stories channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. They say trust is the most dangerous gift you can give someone. My dad trusted a friend once, and it changed everything for me growing up. My life was a constant shuffle between the homes. My dad, Arthur Emma, is a businessman who's always on the move, sharp, ambitious, and constantly chasing the next deal. He built a career that kept him on planes and in boardrooms more than at home. He's divorced, and while he's yet to remarry, he's always made sure I was taken care of. When he's around, it feels like he's trying to pack a month's worth of attention into a few short days, and when he's gone, I just figure out how to manage my mom. Evelyn Benjamin remarried years ago to Michael Cooper. Michael is a good man, thoughtful, steady, and always making an effort to include me together. They have the little kids who bring life and chaos to their home. It's a happy house, warm and full of laughter, but I can't help but feel out of place there. My mom tries her best to make me feel at home, and Michael does too. But something about being in their space makes me feel like an outsider, like I'm squeezing into a picture where I don't quite belong for short trips. When Dad's away for a day I usually stay home alone. I don't mind it. I enjoy the quiet. It's like hitting pause on all the chaos. But when his trips stretch into a week or more, things get more complicated. My mom's house is a logical choice, but being there always feels like I'm tiptoeing around trying not to disrupt their routines. It's no one's fault really. It's just the reality of living between the worlds. This was my normal, the homes, the parents, and a constant effort to balance it all. But sometimes life has a way of throwing something unexpected at you, and that's where the story really begins. Before we dive into this part of the story, I just want to say, if you're as hooked as I hope you are, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It helps so much, and your support means the world to me. Now let's get back to it. My dad doesn't trust easily. Maybe it's all the traveling, the deals he's seen fall apart, or the people who've let him down over the years. But there was one person who stood out from the rest. Everett Cohen. Everett was one of Dad's oldest friends, someone he could count on no matter what. They'd known each other for years, long before I was even born. Everett wasn't just a friend. He was family in a way, a digital marketing guy with a knack for content creation. Everett spent most of his time in front of screens, always working on something new. Like my dad, he was divorced and living alone, pouring himself into his work. And like my dad, Everett was someone I'd always seen as dependable, steady, and safe. We didn't visit Everett often, but when we did, it was always the same. He'd greet us with an easy smile, a firm handshake for Dad, and a kind word for me. His house was simple but inviting, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. You could tell he lived alone, no clutter, no noise, just a quiet, organized life. One day Dad and I stopped by Everett's place for what I thought would be a quick visit. Dad said he had some time before his next meeting, so he wanted to catch up with Everett and unwind a bit. It was nice sitting in Everett's living room, watching them reminisce and share stories. For a moment it felt like everything was perfectly normal, but as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Dad's phone rang. Work, as always, called him away. Unexpectedly, I could see the hesitation on his face as he glanced at me. It was late, and the thought of driving me home, only to turn around and head to his meeting, clearly weighed on him. Before he could decide, Everett stepped in. "She can stay here tonight," Everett offered. "It's no trouble at all. I've got a guest room, and you can pick her up first thing in the morning." Dad looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I nodded. It seemed like the easiest solution, less stress for him, and it was just one night. Everett had always been kind, and I'd never had a reason to feel uneasy around him. I agreed, thinking it was no big deal. Dad thanked Everett, hugged me, and promised to be back early. As I watched his car disappear down the road, I didn't realize that decision would be the start of something I'd never forget. Everett's house had always felt like a safe, quiet retreat. He lived on the edge of town in a small, cozy neighborhood where every house had a neatly trimmed lawn and a calm stillness about it. The kind of place where the loudest noise was the occasional bark of a dog or the hum of someone's lawnmower. That day was no different. After Dad left, Everett and I sat in the living room for a while, chatting about random things. He asked about school, what shows I was into, and whether I'd been following any trends online. It was casual, the kind of small talk that fills the gaps in an unfamiliar setting. Everett had always been easy to talk to, never too serious but never dismissive either. His calm, laid-back demeanor made you feel like you could talk about anything without judgment. He spent most of the time at his desk, though typing away at his computer. The soft clicking of his keyboard became the background music for the evening. Every now and then, he'd spin around in his chair and ask me something like what I wanted for dinner or if I needed anything. I told him I was fine. I wasn't exactly comfortable yet. I barely knew him, but he was making an effort and I appreciated that. At some point he offered to order takeout. I don't cook much, he admitted with a laugh. But there's this great place nearby that does amazing burgers. You'll love it. I nodded, happy to have something to look forward to while we waited for the food. I wandered around the house, admiring the little things that told me more about Everett's life. There were shelves lined with books on marketing, a couple of framed photos of him with my dad, and even some gadgets I couldn't begin to name. Everything about his space felt efficient, like every item had a purpose. Dinner arrived and we ate in the kitchen. Everett cracked a few jokes about how terrible he was at cooking, and I found myself laughing despite my nerves. He had this way of putting you at ease, like you didn't have to try too hard to keep up a conversation. It wasn't until the meal was over and the plates were cleared that the atmosphere began to shift. Everett grabbed a beer from the fridge and offered me a soda. You good with Coke? He asked, holding up a can. I nodded, taking the drink without thinking much of it. He leaned against the counter, sipping his beer as he asked me more questions. What I wanted to do after school, whether I ever thought about working online like him. He was genuinely curious, and for the most part one felt fine answering. But as he poured himself another drink, his tone started to change. You know, he said, swirling the beer in his glass, you've really grown up. I remember when you were just a little kid, always hiding behind your dad's leg. Whenever you met someone new, I smiled, awkwardly unsure how to respond. The compliment felt strange, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why he laughed it off, switching the subject to something else. Some show he thought I might like, but the words lingered in the back of my mind. By the time the clock struck 9, I was ready to call it a night. Everett noticed me glancing at the time and asked, You tired? Want me to set up the guest room? I nodded, grateful for the excuse, to escape the odd tension that had started to build. He led me upstairs, showing me the small, neatly kept room where I'd be sleeping. The bed was already made with crisp white sheets and a soft gray blanket. Bathroom's just down the hall, he said, pointing. If you need anything, just holler. I'll be downstairs working for a bit. I thanked him, closed the door, and exhaled. Finally, some space to breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. I couldn't quite explain, but as the night went on, the house seemed to grow quieter and quieter, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. Downstairs I could hear the faint clink of bottles and the hum of Everett's voice talking to someone on the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was upbeat, almost playful. It wasn't until the call ended and the silence returned that I started to feel something shift again. The quiet wasn't calming anymore. It was heavy, like the air itself had thickened. The silence stretched on, pressing against me like a weight. I tried to brush it off. Everett was probably just focused on work or had gone to bed early, but as the minutes ticked by, something felt off. I couldn't hear the soft clatter of his keyboard anymore. No faint hum of his voice, just silence, thick and unsettling. I told myself I was overthinking. Still, curiosity, or maybe concern, got the better of me. I slipped out of bed, the cool floorboards creaking softly under my bare feet, and made my way toward the stairs. The house was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the hallway nightlight. As I descended, I noticed the faint scent of alcohol lingering in the air. When I reached the bottom, I found him. Everett was slumped on the couch, a half-empty bottle of beer in his hand, his head tilted back against the cushions. The TV flickered with a muted late-night talk show, casting his face in uneven shadows. He looked completely out of it, like he'd drunk himself into a daze. My first instinct was to leave him there. This wasn't my problem, but something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the idea of Dad trusting him to watch over me. Everett, I called softly, standing a few feet away. He didn't respond. His eyes fluttered, opened briefly, glassy and unfocused before drifting shut again. I hesitated, then walked closer, trying to shake him awake gently. Everett, you shouldn't sleep here. Let me help you to your room. He muttered something incoherent, his voice low and slurred. I couldn't make out the words, but it was clear he wasn't fully aware of what was happening carefully. I grabbed his arm and tried to lift him. He was heavier than I expected, his weight almost pulling me down as I guided him to stand. "Come on," I urged, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "Let's get you to bed." We stumbled toward his room, his feet dragging slightly with each step. He was mumbling again, a mix of words that didn't make any sense, something about work, something about Dad. And then, "You're beautiful." The words hit me like a slap, sharp and disorienting. I froze for a second, unsure if I'd heard him right. But before I could react, he laughed a low, drunken chuckle and stumbled against me. So grown up, he slurred, his face inches from mine. "Everett, stop," I said, firmly trying to steady him without letting him get too close. "You're drunk. Let's just get you to bed." But he didn't stop. His hands, clumsy and unsteady, found their way to my shoulders, pulling me closer. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger than I expected in his drunken state. His face was so close now, his breath heavy with the smell of alcohol. Before I could move, he pressed his lips against mine. Panic shot through me like lightning. I twisted my body, pulling away from him as quickly as I could. "Everett." "No," I shouted, my voice trembling, but his grip didn't loosen. His hands moved to my waist, fumbling and desperate as he tried to pull me closer again. I shoved him hard, my adrenaline surging as I managed to break free. "What are you doing?" I yelled, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear and anger. He stumbled back, dazed and confused, muttering something I couldn't understand. Without another word, I ran. My feet pounded against the stairs as I bolted back to the safety of my room. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. My heart was racing, my ch**t tight with a mix of shock, fear and disbelief. I collapsed onto the bed, hugging my knees to my ch**t as tears streamed down my face. What had just happened? How could someone I trusted, even if only because Dad trusted him, do something like that? I felt sick, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a suffocating fog. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but none of them had answers. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and restless exhaustion. I stayed locked in my room, jumping at every sound, every creak of the house. The morning couldn't come soon enough. The days after that night felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the heaviness in my ch**t or the echo of his words in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that moment. His slurred voice, the way he grabbed me, the panic that surged through me. I wanted to forget, to bury it somewhere deep where it couldn't hurt me anymore. But it wasn't that simple. Dad picked me up early the next morning, just as Everett had promised. I kept quiet the entire ride home, staring out the window and nodding along to his usual questions. "How was your night? Did you sleep?" "Okay." He seemed so at ease, so unaware, and I didn't have the heart to shatter that peace. So I said nothing. For a week I carried the secret alone, letting it gnaw at me from the inside. I told myself it was better this way, that telling Dad would only make things worse. He trusted Everett. They were friends, close friends. What would he even say? What would he do? But the weight of it all was unbearable. And one evening it finally spilled out. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling as I sat across from him in the living room. He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing at the tone. In my voice, "I need to tell you something about Everett." At first I could see the confusion on his face, but as I described what happened that night, confusion turned to disbelief, and then to anger. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the tears came anyway, falling hot and fast as I recounted every detail. By the time I finished, his hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with rage. He did what he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "And you waited this long to tell me." I didn't know how I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to ruin things between you. I thought it would just make everything worse." Dad didn't say much after that. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room like he was trying to contain the storm brewing inside him. I trusted him. He muttered more to himself than to me. "I trusted him with you." The next few days were tense. Dad barely spoke, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. I could see the hurt in his eyes. The betrayal. Everett had been more than just a friend to him. He'd been like a brother. And now that bond was broken. 3 weeks later, Everett showed up at our door. I wasn't home when it happened, but Dad told me about it. Afterward, Everett had come to apologize, his voice heavy with regret as he admitted everything. I haven't seen you in days, he'd said. I know why, and I can't live with myself if I don't make this right. He told Dad he'd quit drinking since that night, swearing he'd never touch another drop. He said that moment had been a wake-up call, a mirror held up to the worst parts of himself. I'm sorry, he'd said, his voice breaking. I'll never forgive myself for what I did to her or to you. Dad accepted the apology, but things were never the same. I could see it in the way he talked about Everett, or rather didn't talk about him. Their friendship, once effortless and full of trust, became distant and strained. They stopped meeting up, stopped calling each other. The easy camaraderie they'd shared was gone, replaced by an invisible wall. Neither of them could seem to cross, and I couldn't help but feel guilty. Guilty for telling Dad, even though I knew it was the right thing to do, guilty for being the reason that trust was broken, for the friendship that was lost. I'd never meant to cause all this. I just wanted to feel safe again, but safety came at a cost, and it was one I couldn't ignore. Dad tried to hide it, but I knew he was struggling. He couldn't bear the thought of what Everett had done both to me and to their friendship, and neither could I. The weight of it all stayed with me, a constant reminder of how one moment could ripple out and change everything. Even now I can't help but wonder, did I do the right thing? When I told my dad about what happened, I wasn't trying to hurt him. I wasn't trying to destroy a friendship that meant so much to him. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore. But seeing the pain in his eyes, watching the bond between him and Everett fall apart, I started to question myself. Was there another way? Could I have handled it differently, or was this the only path I could take? On one hand, I felt relief I'd carried that moment with me like a weight, and telling Dad was the only way I could finally breathe again. But on the other hand, I felt guilty, so guilty I'd taken something from my dad, something he cherished. And now I can't help but wonder if the cost of my peace was too high. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have kept it to yourself? Would you have tried to confront Everett directly? Or would you have done exactly what I did and told my dad, knowing it could break his heart? It's not an easy question, and I don't think there's a perfect answer. But I do know this: sometimes doing what feels right can still leave you with questions. Sometimes, no matter how much you try to fix things, the pieces don't fit back together the way they used to. And sometimes you just have to live with the choices you make, even when they hurt. If my story made you think, if it moved you in any way, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means more than I can say, and it helps me keep sharing stories like this with all of you. But more than that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done? Drop your comments below. I want to know how you see it. As for me, I'm still figuring it all out. I'm still learning how to carry the weight of that night, how to forgive myself for the fallout, and how to move forward. Maybe I'll never have all the answers, but for now I'll hold on to this. I did what I thought was right in the moment, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me.